The loudest people inside elite rooms are usually the ones borrowing power instead of owning it. Snow drifted softly across Manhattan beneath silver February skies while black luxury sedans lined the entrance of the Whitford Executive Society, overlooking the Hudson River near the Upper West Side. Warm golden light spilled from towering arched windows across polished marble steps where tuxedoed attendants welcomed governors, investment executives, healthcare billionaires, and corporate trustees arriving beneath crystal chandeliers glowing through the winter evening fog. Inside the private club, soft jazz floated through enormous ballroom halls decorated with ivory roses, antique oil portraits, and polished walnut walls carrying more than a century of old New York institutional history. The annual North Star Global Winter Charity Gala always attracted people obsessed with appearing powerful in front of other powerful people. Personally, I stopped finding those rooms impressive years ago. Real authority rarely introduces itself loudly. I adjusted the sleeves of my dark navy dress quietly while standing near the Eastern Member Lounge beneath warm amber lighting reflecting softly against black marble floors. Unlike most women attending the gala, I wore no diamonds large enough to attract attention across the ballroom. No dramatic designer gown. No public performance of wealth. At 61, I had learned something younger executives and their spouses rarely understood until life embarrassed them publicly. The people who truly belong inside elite institutions never spend much time proving they deserve the room. Across the ballroom, meanwhile, North Star Global executives moved confidently between investors and charity board members beneath crystal chandeliers, while waitstaff carried silver trays of champagne through crowded conversations echoing softly across the marble hallways. Near the center staircase, Victoria Langford descended slowly beside several socialite board members beneath glowing camera flashes and admiring whispers following her through the ballroom. Victoria always understood visibility. Tall. Perfectly styled. Expensive enough to look almost theatrical beneath the chandelier lighting. As wife of North Star Global's chief executive officer, she treated the Whitford Executive Society less like a historic institution and more like a stage built to reflect her own importance publicly. Unfortunately, institutions older than most American corporations usually care very little about ego. I remained near the Eastern Lounge reviewing several foundation donation summaries while snow drifted softly beyond the giant arched windows overlooking Manhattan's glowing skyline and dark winter river below. Around 8:30, one younger hospitality associate approached nervously beside the member lounge entrance. "Mrs. Whitford," he whispered quietly, "Victoria Langford is asking why unauthorized staff are standing inside the executive member section." I almost smiled. Unauthorized staff. After 42 years connected to the club my grandfather helped financially stabilize during the 1970s, the sentence felt strangely entertaining. Before I could answer, however, Victoria herself approached across the marble floor beside two charity board guests while expensive perfume and sharp confidence arrived several seconds before her voice did. "Excuse me," she announced loudly enough for nearby executives to hear beneath the soft jazz drifting through the ballroom. "This lounge is reserved for executive members and their families." Several conversations nearby quieted immediately. Around the lounge entrance, younger associates froze beneath the warm chandelier lighting while snow reflected silver against the towering windows surrounding the room. I looked toward Victoria calmly. "Yes," I answered softly. "I am aware." Her expression tightened slightly, clearly irritated by the lack of embarrassment she expected from me publicly. "Then perhaps you should return to the hospitality floor downstairs before security becomes involved." Nearby executives pretended not listening while watching everything carefully over champagne glasses and polite smiles. That is the nature of elite Manhattan institutions. Everyone watches humiliation quietly while pretending elegance still exists. I closed the donation binder gently. Against the polished walnut table beside me. "Security will not be necessary," I replied calmly. Victoria laughed lightly beneath the chandelier glow, while one of her companions smirked openly near the marble staircase. "Honestly," Victoria continued, "these clubs are becoming impossible to manage if staff members start wandering into private executive spaces dressed like guests." Silence spread across the Eastern Lounge almost instantly afterward. Not shocked silence. Recognizing silence. Several older members standing nearby slowly lowered their drinks while younger associates exchanged nervous glances beneath the soft amber lighting. Then near the far entrance of the ballroom, The club's executive director abruptly stopped walking the moment he heard Victoria Langford's voice echo across the marble hall. The moment the executive director stopped near the ballroom entrance, the atmosphere inside the Eastern Member Lounge shifted almost imperceptibly beneath the warm chandelier light and drifting jazz echoing softly across the marble halls of the Whitford Executive Society. Snow continued falling outside the giant arched windows overlooking Manhattan, while black town cars arrived steadily beneath glowing brass lanterns along the private entrance below. Around the lounge, conversations slowed into careful silence as older members exchanged quiet glances over champagne glasses and polished silver trays resting untouched beside the walnut bar. Victoria Langford, however, still looked completely confident beneath the crystal lighting, reflecting across her emerald designer gown and diamond earrings. She had not yet realized the room itself was beginning to turn against her socially. Honestly, Victoria continued while gesturing lightly toward me beneath the warm ballroom glow. Membership standards used to mean something here. One of the younger hospitality associates standing near the lounge entrance looked physically uncomfortable now, while several executives nearby pretended studying artwork along the walls rather than acknowledging the public humiliation unfolding beside the member corridor. The executive director finally approached across the marble floor, carrying none of the calm composure elite institutions usually train into leadership staff. His expression looked pale beneath the chandelier light. "Mrs. Langford," he said carefully, "perhaps we should continue this discussion privately." Victoria laughed lightly while adjusting the silver bracelet resting against her wrist. "There is nothing private about asking unauthorized people to leave restricted member areas." Silence settled heavily again throughout the lounge. Then something subtle but important happened. Two elderly trustees standing near the fireplace slowly turned fully toward the conversation. Older Manhattan institutions operate differently than corporate environments. The most powerful people rarely interrupt immediately. They simply start paying attention. I remained seated near the walnut table with the donation binder resting calmly beside my champagne glass, while snow drifted against the dark skyline outside the towering windows overlooking the Hudson River below. "Victoria," the executive director said more quietly now, "Mrs. Whitford is not unauthorized." Victoria smiled dismissively without looking at him directly. "Then perhaps someone should explain why nobody recognizes her." Several nearby executives visibly lowered their eyes afterward because that sentence revealed more about Victoria than she realized publicly. Old money circles rarely admire people obsessed with recognition. Across the ballroom, meanwhile, whispers had already started moving quietly between charity board members and longtime trustees beneath soft jazz and glowing chandelier reflections stretching across the marble floors. One older financial executive standing near the staircase leaned toward another member and quietly asked, "Does she truly not know who Eleanor Whitford is?" The other man only shook his head slowly beneath the amber lighting. Victoria finally looked toward me directly again while the executive director stood frozen beside her. "You understand this section is reserved for principal members and legacy families, correct?" she asked coolly. I almost smiled at the irony hidden inside the sentence. "Yes," I answered softly. "My family established that policy in 1958. The room went completely silent afterward. Not awkward silence. Institutional silence. The kind that falls across old Manhattan rooms when someone suddenly realizes social gravity has shifted permanently beneath their feet. Victoria blinked once beneath the chandelier light while confusion slowly replaced arrogance across her expression for the first time all evening. Near the ballroom entrance, 3 older trustees had already started walking toward the Eastern Lounge beneath the glow of the crystal chandeliers and towering oil portraits lining the marble corridor walls. The executive director looked like a man silently praying time might reverse itself before the next 60 seconds unfolded publicly. Victoria glanced between him and me while the ballroom around us seemed to quiet almost unnaturally beneath the soft jazz and winter storm beyond the windows. "Wait," she said slowly now. "Whitford." One of the approaching trustees stopped beside the lounge entrance beneath the chandelier glow and answered before I could speak myself. "Eleanor Whitford," he said calmly, "owns controlling trustee authority over this institution." The moment the trustee publicly identified Eleanor Whitford as controlling authority over the Whitford Executive Society, the emotional temperature inside the Eastern Lounge changed completely beneath the warm chandelier light and drifting jazz echoing softly across the marble ballroom. Snow continued falling outside the towering arched windows overlooking Manhattan, while the Hudson River reflected silver beneath the winter skyline beyond the glass. Around the lounge, executives who moments earlier pretended not noticing Victoria Langford's humiliation of Eleanor now stood painfully still beside champagne trays and polished walnut tables as realization spread quietly through the room. Victoria herself looked frozen beneath the chandelier glow. Her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and social panic. Beside her, the executive director remained visibly uncomfortable, while the three approaching trustees stopped near the lounge entrance beneath towering oil portraits lining the marble corridor walls. One older trustee folded his hands calmly before speaking again. Mrs. Whitford's family established the Society's Modernization Trust during the fiscal restructuring crisis of 1976. Nearby executives lowered their eyes immediately because older Manhattan institutions treat family legacy very differently than corporations treat temporary executive status. Legacy survives leadership turnover. Prestige built through trusteeship survives quarterly earnings calls and fashionable public branding campaigns. Victoria glanced toward me again while snow drifted softly against the dark skyline outside the windows. "Nobody told me," she whispered quietly now. I remained calm because embarrassment already filled the room heavily enough without adding cruelty to it. "People who truly belong here rarely announce themselves publicly," I answered softly. That sentence settled across the lounge with far more force than shouting ever could have accomplished. Several older members near the fireplace exchanged quiet glances while one younger investment executive slowly moved away from Victoria toward the opposite side of the ballroom. Elite Manhattan institutions always react quickly once social gravity changes direction. The people most obsessed with status often become liabilities the moment they publicly misuse it. Around the ballroom, meanwhile, whispers spread steadily beneath crystal chandeliers and warm jazz drifting through crowded conversations. "That is Eleanor Whitford. The Whitford family still controls the trustee structure. Victoria Langford publicly insulted her." The sentences moved quietly between executives, charity board members, and institutional donors faster than any formal announcement ever could. Social collapse inside elite circles rarely happens dramatically. It happens through whispers powerful people stop correcting publicly. Victoria finally turned toward the executive director with visible frustration breaking through her polished composure beneath the chandelier glow. "Why was I not informed she was a principal trustee?" The executive director hesitated carefully before answering, because no response could rescue the situation anymore. Mrs. Whitford specifically requested maintaining low visibility during operational and charitable events. Of course I did. Real institutional authority rarely needs introducing itself at cocktail receptions. Across the ballroom entrance, meanwhile, another black sedan arrived beneath falling snow while two elderly trustees entered slowly through the marble foyer carrying decades of quiet New York influence beneath understated winter coats and polished leather gloves. One of them spotted me immediately and smiled warmly before approaching through the crowd. "Eleanor," he said gently. "I heard there was confusion regarding member access tonight." Nearby executives visibly stiffened after hearing the familiarity in his tone. That man alone controlled 3 major philanthropic hospital foundations across Manhattan. Victoria's husband, Daniel Langford, finally appeared near the staircase moments later after clearly hearing rumors spreading through the ballroom. The moment he saw the trustees surrounding me near the Eastern Lounge, the color visibly drained from his face beneath the crystal lighting. Unlike Victoria, Daniel understood exactly how dangerous this situation had become socially and corporately. Northstar Global depended heavily on private institutional relationships cultivated inside rooms exactly like this one. Alienating controlling trustees inside elite Manhattan circles was not merely embarrassing. It threatened access itself. Daniel approached carefully beside the marble staircase while soft jazz continued drifting through the ballroom beneath the chandeliers overhead. "Mrs. Whitford," he said quietly, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding tonight." I looked toward him calmly while snow reflected softly against the towering windows overlooking Manhattan beyond the river.
"No," he answered gently.
"I believe your wife understood exactly how she wished to treat people she considered beneath her." For the remainder of the evening, the Whitford Executive Society continued operating beneath warm chandelier light, drifting jazz, and polished Manhattan elegance, but the emotional atmosphere inside the ballroom had shifted permanently after. Victoria Langford's public humiliation of Eleanor Whitford near the Eastern Member Lounge. Snow still fell softly outside the towering windows overlooking the Hudson River, while black luxury sedans arrived steadily beneath brass lanterns and marble entryways below. Yet inside the ballroom, conversations no longer centered around charity donations, investment forecasts, or North Star Global's expansion strategies. They centered around Victoria. More specifically, around the catastrophic mistake she had made in front of trustees, institutional donors, and some of the most quietly influential people in Manhattan. Victoria herself stood near the marble staircase beside Daniel Langford beneath the crystal chandelier glow, while several socialite acquaintances who earlier surrounded her now drifted carefully toward other conversations across the ballroom. Elite circles rarely confront disgrace directly. They simply stop standing too close to it publicly. Daniel's expression remained tight beneath the warm lighting, while he quietly apologized to several trustees near the Walnut Bar. The problem, however, was not merely personal embarrassment anymore. North Star Global depended heavily on private relationships cultivated through old institutional networks like the Whitford Executive Society. Investors trusted executive access. Charity boards valued social credibility. Healthcare foundations monitored character quietly long before approving partnerships publicly. And tonight, Victoria had demonstrated something wealthy institutions never forgive easily: arrogance toward invisible authority. I remained seated near the Eastern Lounge beneath soft amber light, while reviewing revised scholarship donation summaries beside untouched champagne and polished silver candle holders reflecting warmly against the marble floors. Several trustees joined me quietly throughout the evening while conversations moved naturally toward philanthropy planning and governance matters unrelated to the ballroom drama unfolding around us. That contrast mattered. Real institutional power continues functioning calmly, while performative status collapses emotionally nearby. Around 10 o'clock, Victoria finally approached me again, though this time without her earlier confidence or theatrical composure beneath the chandelier glow. Daniel walked beside her looking exhausted beneath the warm ballroom lighting while snow reflected softly against the dark skyline outside the towering windows. Victoria stopped several feet away before speaking carefully. "Mrs. Whitford," she began quietly, "I owe you an apology." Nearby conversation softened immediately as several members pretended not listening while observing every word over crystal glasses and polished walnut tables. I looked toward Victoria calmly. "You owe the staff downstairs an apology first," I answered gently. Her expression shifted slightly beneath the chandelier light, because she clearly expected the conversation to remain focused on herself rather than the employees she dismissed publicly earlier. "The hospitality associates you insulted tonight," I continued softly, "work harder than most executives who pass through this building." Daniel lowered his eyes briefly while Victoria stood completely silent. Across the ballroom, several older trustees exchanged quiet approving glances near the fireplace beneath the oil portraits lining the marble walls. One thing old Manhattan institutions respect deeply is how people treat employees when nobody important appears to be watching. Victoria finally nodded stiffly beneath the crystal lighting. "I understand." But the truth was she still did not fully understand yet. Social humiliation embarrassed her. Institutional disappointment had not reached her completely. Around the ballroom, meanwhile, whispers regarding the incident had already spread beyond the Whitford Executive Society itself. Several executives quietly texted associates. Charity board members contacted one another privately. A healthcare foundation director near the Western Corridor reportedly informed another trustee that North Star's leadership culture now appeared socially unstable. That phrase alone could quietly damage corporate relationships for years inside elite East Coast circles. Near midnight, as guests slowly gathered coats beneath the marble foyer and snow drifted softly across Manhattan outside the towering entrance windows, the executive director approached me beside the Eastern Lounge carrying a sealed ivory envelope embossed with the Society's gold trustee seal. His expression remained carefully neutral beneath the chandelier glow. "The governance committee requested immediate review proceedings regarding Mrs. Langford's membership conduct," he explained quietly. Across the ballroom, Victoria froze completely the moment she saw the envelope in his hands. By the following Monday morning, Manhattan had thawed slightly beneath pale winter sunlight while snowmelt reflected across the sidewalks surrounding the Whitford Executive Society, and the towering financial district beyond the Hudson River. Inside elite social circles, however, the atmosphere surrounding Victoria Langford remained colder than the February air drifting between the city's glass towers. The governance review initiated during the gala had already spread quietly through executive philanthropy boards, healthcare foundations, and institutional donor circles faster than Daniel Langford's public relations advisors could contain privately. In Manhattan's old money environment, reputation rarely collapses through headlines first. It collapses through invitations disappearing silently. Around 9 o'clock that morning, Victoria arrived at the headquarters of the Harrington Women's Leadership Foundation wearing dark sunglasses and an expensive ivory coat beneath the pale winter sky. The foundation's annual spring charity luncheon had featured Victoria prominently for years alongside political donors, hospital trustees, and executive spouses throughout Manhattan's upper social circles. Yet the moment she entered the marble lobby beneath soft chandelier lighting, something immediately felt different. Conversations lowered subtly. Two board members near the reception desk nodded politely before turning away without stopping to speak. One younger assistant avoided eye contact entirely while organizing registration folders beside the brass elevator doors. Victoria attempted maintaining composure beneath the polished atmosphere, but elite social rejection feels different from ordinary embarrassment. It arrives quietly enough for plausible deniability, while still making isolation unmistakably clear. Upstairs, meanwhile, the Foundation's executive committee had already completed an emergency governance discussion regarding conduct concerns connected to institutional relationships. Those phrases sound harmless publicly. Inside Manhattan charity networks, they function almost like social exile notices. Across town, North Star Global executives experience growing discomfort of their own beneath the cold lighting and glass conference rooms overlooking Lower Manhattan. Several institutional healthcare donors connected to the Whitford Executive Society had quietly postponed partnership meetings with North Star, while investors started asking Daniel Langford uncomfortable questions regarding reputational exposure surrounding executive leadership culture. Public companies survive financial losses more easily than social instability among influential institutional circles. Around noon, Daniel sat inside North Star's executive boardroom, reviewing updated investor summaries beneath gray winter sunlight filtering through the skyscraper windows. One board advisor finally placed a printed report onto the polished conference table carefully before speaking. 3 philanthropic healthcare partners suspended spring collaboration reviews this morning. Daniel lowered his eyes slowly toward the report. He already understood why. Across Manhattan, meanwhile, I spent the afternoon inside the Whitford Society's private library beneath warm amber lighting and towering walnut bookshelves reviewing scholarship foundation budgets beside several trustees while soft piano music drifted quietly through the historic reading rooms overlooking the Hudson River. The contrast between calm institutional continuity and the growing instability surrounding Victoria could not have been sharper. Real authority continues functioning quietly regardless of public emotional chaos nearby. Around 3:30, the Society's executive director entered the library carrying several governance folders beneath one arm while sunlight reflected softly against antique brass lamps and dark wood paneling surrounding the room. Additional complaints were submitted regarding Mrs. Langford's treatment of hospitality staff during previous events, he explained carefully. I remained silent for several seconds because that detail saddened me more than the public humiliation itself. Cruelty repeated over time reveals character far more clearly than isolated mistakes. One older trustee beside the fireplace removed his glasses slowly before speaking. People reveal who they are most honestly when they believe someone beneath them cannot respond. Outside the tall library windows, ferries crossed the cold gray Hudson beneath Manhattan's pale skyline, while winter sunlight faded across the river. Around the city, meanwhile, Victoria continued discovering invitations quietly disappearing from her calendar one event at a time. A spring museum gala postponed her attendance confirmation. A healthcare donor luncheon removed her from the honorary seating list. One private charity board suddenly announced leadership restructuring considerations, only days after the Whitford Gala incident spread through institutional circles. By evening, Victoria finally understood the most devastating reality inside elite Manhattan culture. Wealth may purchase visibility, but social belonging depends entirely on whether powerful people still feel comfortable standing beside you publicly. 3 days later, Cold rain swept across Manhattan beneath dark March clouds, while the Whitford Executive Society prepared quietly for one of its most consequential governance reviews in decades. The building itself remained elegant as always beneath glowing brass lanterns, polished marble corridors, and warm chandelier light reflecting against antique walnut paneling overlooking the Hudson River beyond the towering arched windows. But inside trustee circles, conversations had become unusually serious. Victoria Langford's behavior was no longer viewed as a private social embarrassment. It had evolved into an institutional liability, attached directly to Northstar Global's executive reputation. Around 7 o'clock that evening, trustees gathered inside the society's private governance chamber beneath. Oil portraits dating back nearly a century while rain tapped softly against the windows facing the Manhattan skyline. Unlike the grand ballroom downstairs, the chamber felt intentionally restrained.
No dramatic luxury. No performative vealt.
Only dark wood, soft amber lighting, leather chairs, and quiet authority shaped through generations of institutional continuity. That distinction mattered deeply. Old money governance values permanence over spectacle. I arrived carrying several scholarship foundation summaries beneath one arm, while trustees reviewed governance files spread carefully across the polished conference table beneath brass reading lamps. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody sought attention.
Élite institutionnelle conséquences rarely arrivent émotionnally.
They arrived procedurally. Across town meanwhile, Daniel Langford sat inside Northstar Global headquarters reviewing emergency communications reports beneath the cold glow of executive office, lighting overlooking rain-covered Manhattan streets below. Several institutional healthcare partners had quietly delayed partnership renewals following growing social instability surrounding the Langford name. One board advisor finally spoke carefully, while closing a legal briefing folder beside the skyline windows. The Whitford Society Governance Review has become widely known among donor networks. Daniel rubbed his forehead silently because he finally understood the scale of damage unfolding now. Northstar's problem was never merely Victoria's public humiliation of Eleanor Whitford. The problem was that influential institutions no longer trusted the judgment surrounding Northstar leadership socially. In Manhattan executive culture, reputational instability spreads faster than financial instability ever does. Back inside the governance chamber, trustees reviewed witness statements from hospitality associates, donor representatives, and event staff beneath the warm glow of antique brass lighting. Several reports described similar patterns of dismissive behavior toward employees during previous charity functions involving Victoria Langford over the past 2 years. One older trustee removed his glasses quietly before speaking. "This review is not about a single evening," he observed calmly. "It concerns conduct incompatible with institutional standards." Rain reflected silver against the windows behind him while soft thunder rolled faintly above the Hudson River outside the towering skyline beyond the glass. Around the table, several trustees nodded silently. They were not angry. Institutional disappointment carries a much colder emotional texture than anger. Around 8:30, Victoria finally entered the chamber beside Daniel beneath dim, hallway lighting and polished marble archways leading toward the governance suite. For the first time since the gala incident, Victoria no longer looked glamorous. She looked exhausted, smaller somehow beneath the quiet weight of elite disapproval surrounding her publicly now. She took her seat carefully near the far end of the conference table while trustees remained composed beneath the amber lighting. Nobody attempted humiliating her. That was never necessary inside institutions like this. Silence itself already carried enough authority. The executive director finally opened the review proceedings formally, while rain continued falling across Manhattan beyond the towering windows overlooking the river below. "Mrs. Langford," he began calmly, "the Whitford Executive Society Governance Committee convened tonight regarding concerns involving treatment of staff, member conduct standards, and institutional reputation exposure." Victoria lowered her eyes toward the polished walnut table, while Daniel sat motionless beside her beneath the soft brass lighting. Then the executive director turned slightly toward me before speaking the sentence that changed the atmosphere inside the room completely. "Mrs. Whitford," he said respectfully, "as controlling trustee authority, the final membership recommendation ultimately rests with you." Rain continued falling steadily across Manhattan, while warm amber light reflected against the polished walnut walls inside the Whitford Executive Society Governance Chamber. overlooking the dark Hudson River below. The atmosphere inside the room remained calm, restrained, and almost painfully quiet after the executive director formally acknowledged Eleanor Whitford's controlling trustee authority before the assembled governance committee. Around the long conference table, trustees reviewed conduct reports and institutional policy summaries beneath brass reading lamps, while thunder rolled softly beyond the towering windows facing the rain-covered skyline. Victoria Langford sat motionless beside Daniel beneath the muted lighting, her earlier confidence from the gala now completely erased beneath weeks of growing social isolation and institutional scrutiny. No one inside the chamber appeared emotional. That alone made the evening feel even more devastating. Elite institutions do not operate through dramatic punishment. They operate through measured exclusion. The executive director carefully organized the final governance files before speaking again beneath the soft glow of the brass lamps. The committee has completed review regarding member conduct standards, treatment of hospitality staff, and reputational exposure affecting institutional partnerships connected to the society. Victoria lowered her eyes toward the polished conference table, while Daniel remained rigid beside her beneath the rain-shadowed windows overlooking Manhattan. Across the room, several trustees exchanged quiet glances but offered no visible hostility. The decision forming inside the chamber no longer required anger. It only required procedure. One elderly trustee near the fireplace finally spoke while closing a leather governance binder softly against the table. The Whitford Society survived for generations because members understood one principle above all others, he said calmly. Privilege inside this institution is conditional upon dignity toward others regardless of status. Silence settled heavily afterward while rain traced silver streams down the towering windows surrounding the chamber. Victoria swallowed slowly before finally speaking for the first time in nearly 20 minutes. I made a mistake, she admitted quietly. I was embarrassed publicly and reacted poorly. Several trustees remained expressionless because the problem extended beyond embarrassment now. Institutions like the Whitford Society judge patterns of character, not isolated emotional moments. I looked toward Victoria calmly beneath the warm amber lighting reflecting across the dark walnut walls and antique oil portraits surrounding the chamber. The issue was never whether you recognized me, I said softly. The issue was how comfortably you mistreated someone you believed carried no authority at all. That sentence settled deeper than any public humiliation could have accomplished. Daniel closed his eyes briefly beside her because he finally understood what his wife failed to recognize during the gala. The trustees were not defending Eleanor Whitford's status. They were defending the values protecting the institution itself. Around 9:15, the executive director distributed final voting documents beneath the brass reading lamps, while rain continued falling against the skyline outside. Trustees reviewed the recommendations silently before signing one by one across the polished walnut table. No dramatic speeches followed.
No theatrical confrontation.
Just quiet institutional consequence moving forward exactly as systems designed over generations intended. After the final document was collected, the executive director stood carefully beneath the soft lighting and addressed the chamber formally. By unanimous governance vote, he announced calmly, Victoria Langford's membership privileges within the Whitford Executive Society are hereby permanently revoked effective immediately. The words landed softly inside the room, yet their impact felt enormous beneath the silence surrounding the chamber afterward. Victoria stared downward without moving while Daniel's shoulders visibly lowered beside her beneath the amber glow reflecting against the rain-dark windows. Outside the chamber meanwhile, Manhattan continued glowing through the storm as ferries crossed the dark Hudson beneath skyscraper lights stretching endlessly across the wet skyline. Inside the room, however, one final responsibility remained unfinished. The executive director stepped toward me carrying a small black leather membership case, embossed with the Whitford Society crest in gold beneath the brass lighting. Mrs. Whitford, he said respectfully, institutional protocol requires controlling trustee confirmation. I accepted the membership case calmly while Victoria finally looked toward me again beneath exhausted eyes and fading social certainty. For several quiet seconds, only the sound of rain filled the chamber. Then I closed the case gently and spoke the sentence that ended her place inside the institution completely. Victoria Langford, I said softly, your access to the Whitford Executive Society is permanently revoked. By late March, Manhattan had finally begun emerging from winter beneath pale blue skies and warmer sunlight reflecting softly across the Hudson River outside the towering glass skyline of Lower Manhattan. The Whitford Executive Society remained exactly as it had for generations beneath glowing brass lanterns, polished marble corridors, and quiet institutional elegance untouched by the social collapse surrounding Victoria Langford. Inside elite East Coast circles, however, her removal from the society had become one of the most quietly discussed governance scandals of the season. Nobody spoke about it publicly in newspapers or financial television interviews. Institutions like the Whitford Society protect discretion carefully. But inside charity foundations, healthcare donor boards, and executive philanthropy circles, everyone knew exactly what had happened. Victoria Langford had mistaken visibility for authority and discovered too late that the room she tried controlling belonged to someone who never needed attention to command it. Around noon one Thursday, sunlight poured warmly through the towering library windows of the Whitford Society, while trustees reviewed spring scholarship allocations beneath antique brass lamps and dark walnut shelves lined with nearly a century of institutional records. Outside, ferries crossed the river beneath clear skies while Manhattan shimmered gold beyond the water. Inside the library, however, calm continuity had fully returned. Hospitality associates moved confidently through the corridors again. Donors resumed private meetings. Charity committees finalized healthcare grants beneath quiet conversations and soft piano music drifting through the historic reading rooms. The institution no longer carried tension because the instability had already been removed procedurally. Across town, meanwhile, Victoria's social isolation continued deepening beneath the polished surface of Manhattan executive culture. Invitations stopped arriving almost completely now. Several museum boards quietly replaced her committee assignments. A luxury charity auction reassigned her honorary hosting role only days before public announcement. Even among executive spouses, conversations became noticeably cautious whenever Victoria entered a room. Elite institutions never enjoy unpredictability around reputation. Daniel Langford suffered his own consequences privately as North Star Global investors began questioning whether executive judgment remained reliable when personal conduct destabilized institutional relationships across multiple philanthropic networks simultaneously. None of it appeared dramatic publicly. That is what made the damage more permanent. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, one younger associate from the Whitford Society's governance division joined me beside the tall library windows overlooking the river while sunlight reflected softly against the polished wooden floors beneath us. She hesitated before finally speaking. "Mrs. Whitford," she asked carefully, "why did you never tell people who you really were?" Outside the windows, Manhattan glowed peacefully beneath the spring sky while ferries moved slowly across the Hudson below. I smiled faintly because younger professionals often misunderstand the relationship between power and visibility. Because institutions survive more safely when authority is quiet, I answered softly. The associate looked thoughtful beneath the warm library lighting while soft piano music drifted through the historic reading room behind us. Most people in this city spend their lives trying to appear important, I continued calmly. The dangerous ones are usually the people who need everyone else to know they matter. She nodded slowly afterward while looking toward the skyline beyond the river. Across Manhattan, meanwhile, Victoria reportedly attempted joining another executive social club through several high-profile referrals connected to healthcare donor circles. Her application entered extended review status within 48 hours. In elite East Coast institutions, reputations follow people quietly through closed doors long before official decisions appear publicly. That evening, as sunset reflected gold across the Hudson River outside the Whitford Society's towering windows, several trustees gathered for a small scholarship reception beneath soft jazz and glowing chandelier light inside the restored East Ballroom where the original gala confrontation happened weeks earlier. The atmosphere now felt calm, elegant, and emotionally settled again. One elderly trustee standing near the marble staircase glanced toward me thoughtfully before speaking beneath the warm amber lighting. "Funny," he observed quietly, "how people obsessed with status almost always fail to recognize actual class standing directly beside them." I looked across the ballroom where hospitality associates moved confidently through the room beneath crystal chandeliers and polished marble arches while Manhattan glowed softly beyond the towering windows. "That is because real authority rarely introduces itself loudly," I answered gently. It simply remains standing after performance disappears. By early May, spring sunlight settled warmly across Manhattan, while the Hudson River shimmered beneath clear blue skies stretching beyond the city's glass towers and historic limestone buildings along the Upper West Side. The Whitford Executive Society stood exactly where it always had, beneath polished brass lanterns and towering arched windows glowing softly against the evening skyline. Inside the institution, scholarship programs expanded quietly, healthcare foundations finalized new donor initiatives, and younger associates moved confidently through marble corridors lined with oil portraits and dark walnut paneling carrying more than a century of institutional memory. Stability had fully returned. Looking back now, the most remarkable part of the entire situation was how quickly everything revealed itself once performance disappeared from the room. Victoria Langford spent years believing visibility created authority, because modern executive culture often rewards people who appear powerful loudly enough in public. But institutions older than corporations measure people differently. They watch how individuals treat employees, waitstaff, assistants, and quiet professionals long before they care about titles, designer gowns, or social media photographs beside charity banners. Real influence inside elite Manhattan circles comes from whether people trust your character when nobody important appears to be watching. Around 6:31 warm Thursday evening, trustees gathered inside the Eastern Ballroom for the Whitford Society's annual scholarship reception beneath glowing chandeliers and soft jazz drifting through the restored marble hall where the original gala confrontation unfolded months earlier. Outside the towering windows, sunset reflected gold across the Hudson River, while ferries crossed slowly beneath the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the water. Hospitality associates moved confidently through the ballroom carrying silver trays and greeting members comfortably now without tension lingering inside the institution anymore. That mattered to me more than Victoria's removal ever did. Institutions should feel safe for the people working quietly inside them every day. Several younger scholarship recipients stood near the grand staircase speaking with trustees and healthcare donors beneath warm amber lighting while old Manhattan elegance filled the ballroom once again without arrogance poisoning the atmosphere around it. One young woman preparing for graduate studies in healthcare administration approached me near the Eastern Lounge while soft piano music drifted across the marble floors beneath the crystal chandeliers overhead. "Mrs. Whitford," she said carefully, "everyone here talks about how calm you remained through everything that happened." I smiled faintly while looking toward the ballroom where conversations moved warmly beneath the spring evening light reflecting against the windows. "Calm is easier," I answered gently, "when you stop confusing respect with attention." She looked thoughtful afterward while glancing around the ballroom filled with trustees, donors, associates, and hospitality staff speaking comfortably together beneath the restored atmosphere of quiet dignity the society protected for generations. Across Manhattan, meanwhile, Northstar Global continued operating beneath new executive oversight, while Daniel Langford gradually disappeared from many of the city's most influential philanthropic circles. The company survived financially, but socially, the damage lingered quietly inside institutional relationships no public relations campaign could fully repair. Victoria herself reportedly relocated much of her social activity toward Miami and Palm Beach after Manhattan charity boards and executive societies stopped welcoming her comfortably. No dramatic scandal followed. No newspaper headlines destroyed her publicly. The consequences simply settled slowly across her life one invitation at a time. That is how old institutions respond when trust disappears. Later that evening, after the scholarship reception concluded and guests slowly departed beneath the glowing chandeliers and warm spring air drifting through the open terrace doors overlooking the river, I walked alone through the Eastern Lounge where everything originally began months earlier. The same marble floors reflected softly beneath the amber lighting. The same towering windows framed Manhattan's skyline beyond the Hudson River outside. For several quiet moments, I simply stood there listening to soft jazz echo through the nearly empty ballroom, while the city glowed peacefully beneath the spring night sky. Then I remembered the sentence Victoria said during the gala before she understood who stood in front of her. "These clubs are becoming impossible to manage if staff members start wandering into private executive spaces dressed like guests." Funny how people obsessed with proving they belong somewhere almost always reveal the most about themselves eventually. Because the truth is, genuinely powerful people never spend much time announcing their importance publicly. They do not need to. Real authority is usually the quiet woman standing calmly beside the window while everyone else mistakes dignity for invisibility. And by the time arrogant people finally recognize the difference, access has already disappeared behind them forever.